Hello everyone and welcome to a special webinar by our host Varnish Software on the future of streaming technologies over the next 5 years. My name is Kauser Kanji. I run an OTT consultancy called VOD Professional. Joining me today to gaze into our various crystal balls are, in the order that I can see them, Matt, if you can start please.
Sure, I'm Matt Westrup. I'm head up the technology and operations teams for A+E Networks in EMEA. So we have a portfolio of 5 key brands across those territories, and we're a kind of traditional broadcaster with 20 to 30 linear channels across that, but also a rapidly growing digital pipeline and product suite across those portfolios as well. So yeah, everything I've learned about my crystal ball comes from the hard miles of getting things wrong and starting again.
Thank you very much, Matt. Joakim.
Yes, hello, Kauser. So my name is Joakim Berg, and I'm the head of Varnish Edge Cloud. And I'm primarily focused on building a cloud-native virtualized CDN right now, and sort of driving the adoption of building something that is prepared for the 5G network and beyond that.
Great, thank you very much, Joakim. And Nehal.
Hi everyone, my name is Nehal Mehta and I manage the content delivery network segment at Intel Corporation, and we work very closely with most of the service providers and content providers on their hardware platform needs. And most people tend to associate Intel with just being a silicon provider, but we do lots of software optimization and we contribute a lot to open source community, and we work closely with our ecosystem partners to help our customers address their technology barriers.
Great, thank you very much, Nehal. So we're going to be talking about the future of streaming technologies. Actually, just before we went live, we were discussing whether we sort of needed to put some context around it. So, I mean, obviously the OTT industry is what, let's say 17 years old. Yeah, YouTube went live in 2005 in the UK. 4OD, which was the first terrestrial VOD service, went live in 2006. Sky also went live in 2006. BBC iPlayer went famously live on Christmas Day 2007. Netflix landed here in January 2012. So that's, I suppose, the sort of market. But my first actual experience of on-demand was about in the year 2003, I remember, with an elegant home choice box. But we were just saying in advance of this call that it's not as if, well, at least I don't think that there was any sort of big master plan here. We've kind of evolved the industry as we've been going along. Is that a fair reflection, or do you think somebody did have a master plan somewhere? Matt, you mentioned one name, yeah, before we got on the call.
Yes, it's tempting. Some of the the very big silicon players that it's tempting that they, or if they didn't have a plan, then they would have had a plan before anybody else did, I should think. Because a lot of this, of course, the expenses have been data driven, and that's where their businesses have coalesced around the big technology changes, and they're natural disruptors. So yes, they a plan, no, a vision of the art of the possible, for sure. Everybody else, I think, you're right. I mean, in those 17 years, you go back and the on-demand experience, and there was huge debate about what interactive was and so on at that point in time. All sorts of different ideas about what that was. But the last 5 years, I think streaming has been, that's where it's consolidated to. It's around streaming technologies and products. And there's a long way to go in that consolidation. But it feels like those plans, the last 5 years plans are definitely what people are following.
Yeah. Nehal, what about from Intel's perspective? I mean, you've been working at Intel for a long time, right? And so you've kind of had an overview of this industry from a while back.
Yeah, I think it keeps on emerging, right? The whole model for content providers, not just the distribution, but how they engage and resonate with the audience has changed, right? And it keeps changing. So I think it's still emerging. It has emerged significantly over the last few years, to what Matt was saying. But it's opening doors for more adjacencies. Like you now have more opportunities for hyper-targeted advertisements. The whole channel for advertisements has also changed with the OTT distribution. And what's interesting to me is that, it's all about subscribers these days. It doesn't matter about ARPUs. It doesn't matter about, how profitable one is. It's all about how many subscribers do you have and what's your growth plan. So I think it's been I would say, a transformational shift in terms of, the business model, the technology, and everything else with it.
Yeah, and we're going to be covering some of that ground about the transformation elements today. What about you, Joakim, from a content delivery perspective? How has that changed over the last couple of years, or let's say the last 5 years, in terms of scale, volumes?
Definitely, we've seen this going back and forth between, relying on the giants when it comes to content delivery, to going to try to do it yourself, to get more control, maybe to go back to the giants again, because you realized how complex it is to drive true scale, specifically if you want to have reach, a global audience. A regional audience is a lot easier to do. You can do it with less complexity, but really to drive, to distribute a global audience, any device, and have a flawless experience, that is not easy. And there is a saying within CDN, the CDN in context, that it's very easy to build a CDN, but very hard to operate. So I think it's going back and forth, and hopefully we get to talk a little bit later about why I think that we'll see more types of different CDNs and private CDNs coming back into the picture.
Okay, good. Right, so that's the context. I mean, in classic project management methodology, we're doing, where are we now? Yeah, and then the next question is, where are we going to get to? Yeah, and so we're talking about the next 5 years, because honestly, anything beyond that does become crystal ball territory. Yeah, for the next 5 years, you kind of feel like you can, see paths emerging and see where technologies will be. So first things first, then let's talk about 5G. Yeah. Now, coincidentally, talking about 5 years, I wrote a prediction piece about 5G 5 years ago. Yeah, and we can share it with people if we like in the chat area. But it was interesting to me reading it back about how little I got right. What's going on with 5G? We've been talking about it for a long time, yeah, but it doesn't seem to have gained much traction. Yeah, Nehal?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look at where we were 5 years ago, there was lots of excitement with 5G. But I think anything new takes time, right? So 5G we know is very capital intensive. There are 3 bands, and the lower band and the mid band require new infrastructure. You need much more denser cell sites, which means that you have to acquire new locations. You have to go through all kinds of permits and regulations the carriers have to, and that's time consuming, right? You have to also then lay out the fibers to those tower sites. So all of that takes time. And naturally it's going to happen first at denser areas, right? Then the rural areas. So I think it's probably the complexity that has taken more time. And the only other reason I can think of is maybe the telco carrier sensitivity. When they rolled out 4G, they ended up spending lots and lots of money, right? It was heavy on capex. And for the most part, the benefit of 4G went to some of the content providers, right? How video was one of the big use case when 4G was there. And I think for 5G, my thinking is that many of the telco operators, right, they're still scratching for that golden use case, right? What is it going to be? We do know that CDN, like content distribution, is mainstream. It's right in their core expertise domain, right? It needs to be delivered to the consumer. So there's definitely this thinking that content is one of the mainstream use case. Content delivery is through the 5G networks. But yeah, I think it's taking longer, but it's there now.
Right. I mean, when you say it's there now, for example, I saw that T-Mobile was launching a new 5G plan in the States, and it was, I think, $60 a month, right? And it's uncapped, in terms of data, yeah, and it's going to capture millions of customers. Is that what you're talking about in terms of it's coming now?
Yeah, it's being deployed slowly now. The rollout is happening now, is what I meant. But yeah, it's taking time.
Yeah, well, yes. Matt, from a broadcaster perspective, is 5G on your radar? Does it need to be?
It's not, in the sort of top 5 things that's on my radar, but I think it does need to be, because I mean, Nehal makes a good point there. There's a bit of an air gap between perhaps the 5G hype. There's a lot of people talking sort of, the visions of the future around what 5G will bring, and that's a lot to unpack, and it will have a huge impact probably on how we consume content and experiences, but so much wider, because suddenly you get the Internet of Things as being a reality, and from a mobile point of view, and that changes sort of societal level kind of changes rather than just in entertainment. But there's a bit of an air gap between that sort of quite compelling vision and the infrastructure rollout, which is not nearly as much is written or much enthusiasm around that bit, because it's difficult and expensive and challenging. And of course, the two have to be together. But in terms of, we stopped talking about TV shows when streaming came, and we talk about content. And it looks like with 5G, you stop talking about content and start talking about experiences. And that's quite a leap for content providers, or experience providers, perhaps, as they'll be called. And so there's definitely some thinking in that area. But from an infrastructure point of view, from our perspective, we're really delivering 2 platforms that will be 5G enabled. So, we don't have to get our head around the complexities necessary from a technology point of view, but from an experience point of view, yeah, definitely. So it is an emerging world, but it's something all content providers are going to have to think about.
Joakim, what about from Varnish Software? I mean, you guys have been, I guess, prepping for 5G for years, right? And what do you see happening with 5G over the next 5 years?
Always one step ahead. No, but it's yeah, I mean, that's what we do at Varnish Software. We try to always, saturate the available hardware on the market to be able to deliver, throughput, bandwidth, use all the available hardware. And that's what we've been doing together with Intel a lot, showing that, we can deliver streaming to 40,000 users per node, things like that. So that is the core business of what we do. Then I want to extend and agree with Nehal saying that this is very complicated and complex and costly to deploy 5G as it was with 4G, but not just because that there is a lot of work to do, but there is also a shift in how we do it. So today, most of I think the innovation will come from 5G leaving the proprietary sort of spectrum to being an open platform, open source, open everything, I would call it. Everything is going to be open, and it also requires the telcos to change their skills from maybe proprietary technologies to things like containers, Kubernetes, which is complicated at scale in the beginning. It probably takes years to sort of ramp that up, get it stable, get it right. And as a lot of these telcos today, they have a lot of, it's not going to be a greenfield deployment. It's going to be, they have to invest tons of money to build something new. So I think there is a lot of why it's taking time is because someone is waiting, they're waiting to see someone do it first. Are they succeeding with this? And how did they do it? Did they fail? Okay, let's not fail the way they did. So we definitely see there is some advantages being a greenfield, a new telco doing this without any legacy. You bring in the right skill instead of spending a lot of time sort of retraining and acquiring that skills in different ways. So I see this as one platform for all types of services Yeah.
And
I was going to say, Kauser, and yeah, the Oven report that came out recently predicts that the sort of 5G media experience revenue market will be worth 1.3 trillion in 2028, and 90% of that traffic will be video. So there's definitely, that's quite a bold statement, and yet both Joakim and Nehal have really sort of given a good description of the hard miles that it's going to take to make it a reality.
Joakim, the question that Matt, those are great stats, by the way, and we'll post a link to the Open report if that's all right. Yeah, in the chat area.
I'll find it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Joakim, the question I was going to ask you, actually, I was interested when you said that everybody's kind of waiting for everybody else, to see who's going to make it work. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Is it true to say that some companies, like let's say for example Sky or BT, who are quad players, right? So they've got TV, telephone, broadband, and mobile. Yeah, is it true to say that when 5G is widely available, has mass adoption, and has become resilient and stable enough to continuously use, is it true to say that of their quad revenues, 2 of them will drop off? Because people won't need broadband, and they're certainly not using fixed lines to the extent that they were anymore.
Maybe. I'm hoping at least that it's going to reach that point where we will have any device, same experience on any device anywhere, right? So that's what we are hoping for. Whether video is going to be the big thing for 5G, I'm not sure. It might be one of the first things. So I mean, how useful is 4K or 8K is going to be on a mobile device? I'm not so sure about that. But I mean, where I see the need for 5G and faster broadband is to I moved to a new apartment, and it took me 2 months to get the fiber cable installed, for example. And if I had a 5G device with me, 5G router, I could just use that, moving whatever I want to. And we see a lot of people today working from home. Maybe they buy a house on the countryside, or moving around more maybe. So obviously that's going to be some advantages. And but I mean, we'll have to see. Video is one thing, but if it's going to be mobile video, I'm not sure how much difference it's going to make. At least same experience on any device anywhere. If we can get to that, then I'm happy.
I mean, the thing that
as a consumer,
as a consumer, I mean, the technology guys are always talking about low latency, and also from a consumer perspective, the ability to be able to download an entire HD movie in about 3 seconds or something, on 5G. Are these good video use cases? Are they persuasive, for investment, 5G investment?
Yeah, I think those in my mind are like table stakes, meaning, you got to have those kind of capabilities and feature. But what I see with 5G is more than that, meaning, we know that the OTT space is becoming very hyper competitive, right? It's a hyper competitive marketplace. And the next big thing, it's no more about just peak capacity and delivering QoE to end users. It's going to be more about how can I offer more personalization, how can I offer more interactivity. There are emerging immersive use cases, and maybe even features like allowing customers to pick their own angle to view, right, whatever they might be viewing. So I think those features are what is going to drive differentiation, and it's more about delivering unique user experiences, right, better storytelling, and I think 5G is going to help with all of that.
Matt, does that?
Well, it does, I think, and some of the things that you think that I've seen or heard are even more, I think, immersive. They talk about a tactile experience. Gaming is going to be a big part of it, and maybe it's a sort of deviceless gaming, perhaps, that actual kind of gaming kit will be a bit like vinyl, kind of like a small group of hardcore fans. I think live will be huge, because live at the moment is still, there's a nervousness about putting that in the cloud and being wireless, but 5G is going to change all that from both sides, from a production point of view, but also from a streaming point of view. So it's not just video, it'll be, you know, video plus, you know, we'll see whether AR really comes into its own, but also unlocking the live experience, I think, will be a big one. But so many other use cases outside of, you know, what we think of media with education, you know, museums and experiences. And I just wonder whether there will be, you know, a growth of boutique kind of new businesses that will specialize in that kind of area, a bit like happened with OTT and streaming, actually.
I was reading actually about 5G and OTT earlier, and Matt, you've covered most of the use cases off: remote production, greater creativity, mobile production, faster services, more resilience, lower latency, as we've discussed, and immersive entertainment, and advertising, personalized advertising.
Yeah, and you know, some of these things are, you know, there's a flip side, because, you know, are we ready for this as a, you know, as viewers? Very immersive, data-led, with the advertising experience, the personalization. There'll be so many great potential about it, but it will take a bit of a shift, I think, as well. But I think sports are going to be, you know, an obvious winner, and especially sort of post-pandemic, the kind of stadium experience, but you know, from a remote perspective or even mobile perspective, where you can layer on you know, different views, as Nehal was saying, but also you know, the data, the kind of almost augmented reality experience that you can have then with other people. But I wonder if that accelerates the solo nature, you know, rather isolation, because, you know, the sort of home screen has made quite a big comeback of late, having been out of popularity for a bit. And when you see some of the big movies now going straight to streaming, although we've had the concept of home cinema ever since VHS, but, you know, is this really its real time, the true cinema, is that what will bring, you know, the quality of displays and screens are improving massively. And they won't just be, I don't think, TV sets. Displays will be perhaps in driverless cars, or the shop windows, or, you know, that kind of, you know, maybe it's Blade Runner that had the plan all along, I don't know, but it will definitely broaden out people's idea of how entertainment is consumed and where it's consumed.
Yeah, the cinema thing, that's mainly a political thing, right? It's about pay windows, yeah, and about distribution chains and about cinemas. Yeah, it's less than technology.
It is rather less about technology, I think. But if you get to that point where people will stay at home to watch premieres, then, you know, the need to want to see it in highest, widest, best sound, I think, becomes a bigger imperative than perhaps it has been up until now.
Yeah. My God, right, it's already 23 minutes past the hour, right? So we're halfway through the webinar, and I haven't even told the audience, or asked the audience actually, that please feel free to put your questions into the chat area or the Q&A section down at the bottom there. We've got about another 25-ish minutes. Yeah, so Matt, you were quite right, by the way, in just before we got on the call, we thought that we would flit from 5G to digital experiences and kind of back again, and that is what we're doing in this webinar. Are there any other, by the way, just to end this bit off, are there any other experiences that other technologies will enable, or is it really 5G? Joakim?
I was going to mention that we talked about from the consumer perspective, but I think also from a distribution perspective that we will see, you know, 5G dongles attached to cameras in stadiums and all that kind of stuff. So it's not only between the consumer and the content. It's also going to be part of the making the distribution easier, I think so.
Mm-hmm. And Nehal, anything just to add to that? Yeah, what are you guys doing at Intel? What entertainment experiences are you planning for us?
So we do see lots of interest in new and emerging experiences. You know, we have like focus teams helping service providers to build those new emerging experiences. Like they are really in infancy. I would say it's still emerging, but every single service provider is dabbling into it. You know, every content provider is looking into it. You know, these things do take time, right? So there is a lot happening in the space, I would say. And, I agree with Joakim, it's not just about the end consumers, there are like trials being done for in-stadium experiences where, you have very unique experiences that you can experience in some of the booths, special VIP booths in the stadiums where you can interact more, like, there are special devices over there, you can leverage and use VR 360 kind of technologies. And it's already happening out there, but it's not like, widely available, but there are already trials going on emerging experiences out there.
Okay, so moving on then. So let's talk about the sort of second big issue, about transitioning from broadcast to IP. So the question I have here actually is that my understanding is that it's already cheaper to distribute via IP than broadcast, at least if you're a brand new player. If you're a broadcaster, it might be slightly different. But is that true, first of all? And if it is, then what's the roadblock? What's stopping us moving from broadcast to IP delivery? Who wants to have a stab at that? Joakim?
Sorry, I was a little bit distracted. But yeah, I mean, yes, I think we've already, I'm guessing, depending on where you live in the world, I think we have some places you're already past that you're consuming your, the traditional TV through IP already. So I'm from Sweden and I live in Japan right now. And in Japan, traditional TV is very much what people tend to consume. But back in Sweden for many years, I was having a set-top box and I was doing all my, normal TV channels through to IP delivery. So I think it depends a little bit where you are in the world. We've already seen the shift in many regions. Obviously, it's gonna come more and more, and it's gonna put more traffic on the, on the backbones, on the core networks, and it's all about shifting that, being ready to, sustain that type of traffic, deliver it from the edge, don't let it get too close, too far into your network, and create congestion and so on. So I just see, let it come and we'll deal with it.
Right, okay.
Okay. I think it's both more expensive or less expensive depending on where you are. I think, as you said, if you're a startup, I mean, all of this could be dwarfed by the cost of content and rights, perhaps. But if you are starting up, then yes, you could probably get, and by IP, therefore, you probably mean, an OTT product up and running relatively small scale compared to, going on DTT or a satellite or something. For broadcasters wanting to replace one with the other, then no, you're not going to use IP. Full stop isn't necessarily going to be as efficient as satellite. For a long time, it's very, very efficient at coverage, obviously, and there are decades of infrastructure and habitual behavior and consumer behavior that's and an ecosystem that's built up about that. So it's quite expensive to move, especially as your revenue is not going to be the same in something new than it is in something established. So I think the answer is both yes and no, depending on where you are on that journey.
Is it desirable? Is it something that we want to do? Move from broadcast?
Yeah, if you want to stay relevant, of course, because we're seeing quite dramatic shifts to streaming, and so you absolutely have to have an answer to that, but also to it's consumer driven. But even streaming, and there's a long way to go with that, because we're seeing just last week just the magnitude of mergers and acquisitions in this space, one after the other, sort of Monday and Tuesday last week, extraordinary. And that's going to continue, and so there's still going to be a way before we sort of level out who are the aggregators, how many big, where are the alliances, and what appetite does the consumer have to manage what breadth of products out there. But as we just talked about in our sort of 5G piece, is that in itself is rapidly evolving, and so it's hard to think, but at some point it could be that streaming is seen as quite a traditional technology as well.
Yeah, well, because streaming is now what, a teenager. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's if it's 16 or 17 years old. Nehal, one thing though, broadcasting, as in the actual broadcasting, the thing itself, is elegant. Yeah, it works. Yeah, it's, you know, it covers a population. Yeah, who have an aerial or a set-top box to be able to access digital signals. Yeah, so that's, you know, multicast built in. Yeah, whereas streaming is necessarily unicast, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You typically use multicast many to one for broadcasting, and you know, OTT. It's mainly unicast today. You know, even with 5G and wireless, right? Unicast is the underlying technology, and there have been talks about, you know, even in the cable industry, even with IPTV 2.0, of, you know, whether or not you know, that there's a shift occurring in future from moving from multicast to unicast, right? And it's again all about being able to provide more personalization and have that, you know, feedback loop with the consumer, right? The interactivity. So yeah, it appears that, you know, maybe the industry is heading towards more of unicast model. And the implication of that is, you know, it's only going to add to the overall peak capacity, traffic capacity that you need to serve the users.
Yeah, and it's building in congestion, right?
Yeah,
effectively.
Yeah. In fact, so we, you know, right. So by 2025, you know, there's lots of data point that says that, you know, by 25, you can expect that you have at least 2 billion OTT subscribers.
2 billion.
2 billion, yeah, worldwide. And then if you add other applications for video content, like, you know, maybe cloud gaming, user-generated content, and all of that. Yeah. You know, you could assume that, you know, at maybe any given point of time, you might have at least, you know, 1 billion users. Maybe leveraging or, you know, using content. And even if you were to speculate, you know, let's say the average bandwidth for a user is like 10 MB, the overall peak traffic that you are talking about globally would be close to 10,000 terabits per second. That's a huge number compared to where we are today, which is close to 500 or maybe 1,000 terabits per second.
Right.
So that's a huge shift. And the only way you're going to be able to meet that demand is to, you know, push the content deeper in the network. So this goes back to the comment that, you know, Joakim was making, that, you know, we do see that, you know, the only way to solve the problem would be to leverage the deeper bandwidth and capacities that we have available in the deep networks.
I mean, given all of that, yeah, why don't we just stay with broadcast then? Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating this, by the way. I'm just thinking.
I'm comfortable with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more about, you know, how do you provide the same experience across different screens, right? It's not just your TV, but, you know, your mobile devices. You know, you want your content wherever you are. You want to consume it in your desired way, right? So.
And also, I read that 5G will enable multicast again, actually, rather than just unicast. Is that accurate?
There's work going on to standardize that the technology, you know, to make it available on 5G. It's not being broadly adopted yet, but yes, you know.
Is that around network slicing now?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't network slicing, but more to do with the underlying technology to be able to support ABR on multicast. You know, you get best of both the worlds, right? Not only do you want to offer ABR, but you also want multicast, but two of them need to work together. So there's an underlying technology that you need in the wireless world, which we don't have today. And there are standards bodies working on it.
Joakim, are your broadcast customers, your media and OTT customers, are they aware of what's about to happen over the next few years in terms of the potential for moving, as Nehal said, from traffic of 500 terabytes to, did you say 10,000, Nehal?
10,000, yes.
Right, okay, so that's what, a scale of, it's a factor of 20.
20x, 25x, yeah.
Joakim?
Yes, I have a lot of conversations with telcos, broadcasters about how we can future-proof. So some of them might be anxious about, are we using legacy technology? Will this last? Will this be good enough in the next 5 years? What would be the problem? Is this a good time to start investing in something new? So there's a lot of, like, we looked at that, validation. Like, we have a lot of discussions about how can we build something for the 5G network, for example. What are the different use cases? What technology should we be using? Can we get sub-millisecond latency, which is a common, I think, common misconception, because it is theoretical latency and it's theoretical throughput. So also about what can we expect, maybe a little bit from delivering content within the 5G networks. What are the hurdles and obstacles? Yes, everyone is very interested. Should we use containers? What kind of container orchestration? How much is readily available on the shelf? How much do we have to build ourselves? So all of these discussions are ongoing around the architecture and to be prepared. So yes.
One thing from a personal perspective, I really need to find the formula for, right, so an HD movie, let's say an hour of HD content, yeah, how much transfer does that involve? Is it about 3.5 gig? Do you know? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, yeah. What I'm saying, I suppose, is that I'm trying to figure, I wonder if there's a sliding scale somewhere that says if it's 720p an hour, yeah, then it equals this kind of volume. Yeah, if it's 1080 equals this.
Yeah, it depends on codecs and stuff like that, right? But so speaking of codecs, that is also a very important thing to reduce the actual consumption. So we not only need to have the technology infrastructure in place to deliver, we also need to work on the codecs to make the same experience or the better experience, but not consuming so much bandwidth. Because in theory, like delivering true 4K with maybe, let's say, yesterday's codec wouldn't have been possible today. No one has that available bandwidth, or maybe a very few. So with the evolution of better codecs, we got the 4K experience at the end. So
yeah, and I think that's a really good point, actually, is that the encoding and codecs are going to get better, but they have been. I mean, we've seen that. So it's a race, and then it sort of reduces that bandwidth and increases quality. But I'm going to make a prediction in that I don't think we're going to see the extra bandwidth that created by that or by 5G hoovered up by ever more pixels. People talk about 8K, but I think even seeing 4K rollout, there just isn't the same intense appetite for that kind of step change as there was for HD. And there are other factors like HDR, for instance, and convenience. People have put up with low bandwidth on mobile that they, much to filmmakers' chagrin, watching movies on mobiles, but that isn't going to stop anytime soon. And I've just seen there was a great question that's come in on there about how 5G might fundamentally change storytelling.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I have an answer to that, actually, but I do think about the ingredients. I think to answer that question, fundamentally no, because humans have been telling stories to each other forever in probably quite similar ways. But when you look at the ingredients of immersive technology, of that kind of speed of perhaps mobile edge computing that could process stuff on the edge, which, you know, when you combine that with, you know, an unbelievable amount of data and personalization data that comes along, localization perhaps, and that you can layer that in and have a synchronized experience with many other people, then those same stories may be presented in a different way. But I you know, there are people out there, there are agencies and creatives who specialize in this area, especially with augmented reality, and are producing some really interesting stuff. Now, whether or not that just all ends up with people remaking the same superhero movies time and again, I don't know. But Katrina, I'd love to know your view on that as well in the chat. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you answered the question that I was going to ask actually anyway, which is that isn't there an arms race going on here? Yeah, which is that fine, if we move from H.264 to H.265, a better code, but at the same time we move from HD to 4K. Yeah, so there's one-upmanship going on. There
is, and one of the things when I was preparing for this, I wrote down, is there a race for space? Because the technology might get there way before we've got anything to fill it with. So, you know, and maybe we'll have all this capacity and not much choice. I don't know.
Well, now having said that, Nehal, H.265, I mean, come on, we've been talking about this for what, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years possibly. Yeah. Where is it?
Well, I think that there was some issues with the licensing too, right? Like having to pay royalty and so on. So, you know, we have been trying to help the industry, you know, through a technology called SVD, where, you know, we are trying to bring the newer codec technology to help of, you know, big players like Netflix, right? We partner with them to make it available mainstream. You know, there shouldn't be any royalty issues associated with, you know, using such technologies. And I think we believe that that will probably help industry to accelerate to, you know, using the next technology much faster.
Okay, look, we're coming to this toward the end of the session. I've got one more big question, but just before I do that, quick fire round, which is, 5G. Are we saying it's going to have mass adoption in the next 5 years or not? A yes/no answer will do. Matt?
Yes, next 5 years, yes.
Yeah. Joakim?
Definitely.
Okay.
Not only within video, but maybe even more in other areas.
Enabling other things as well. Nehal?
Yes.
Okay. Joakim, by the way, Larsen, Varnish's CEO, said last year, and I'll just read out a quick quote from him. He said, the way that we see caching software is that it should happen inside the 5G networks themselves. And that will probably happen because as soon as consumers have the 5G experience, there's no way they're going back to the old internet, which is slow and inefficient by comparison. Yeah, and that this will be a big shift for the CDN industry.
Yeah, definitely. No one want to go back. So you don't want to go back to, you know, once you get comfortable with something, you know, we are so impatient these days that, like, even I notice myself almost every day that we get more and more impatience. Everything has to happen instantly. So we used to have the patience to wait for a few seconds on something. Now, if it's not instant, we're clicking that screen over and over again. So we're getting really good at clicking really fast. And I think this is just gonna grow. Everything would have to be instant in the future.
In 1995, I remember trying to load the Timeout website. It was one of the first, Matt, I don't know if you remember it, it was one of the first flashy, big sort of websites. And I remember thinking, if I move the mouse this way, then it will load faster. It was ridiculous stuff like that. The next quick fire question is, transitioning from broadcast to IP, is that going to happen in the next 5 years? Matt, again, yes or no?
Yes, it's already happening.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, but I mean, to the point where we switch off broadcast.
5 years, probably a little bit optimistic, I think.
Yeah. Nehal?
Yes, the transition will happen, but I don't think it's going to go away.
No, okay.
Broadcast will stay.
Broadcast will stay, right? But don't. I mean, don't national governments want to sell off that spectrum to somebody else if they could switch off the broadcast signal?
Yeah, if it gets down to that, then yes.
Right. Okay.
But otherwise, I think it'll be hard to not have it. It will still stay. Is how I see it.
Yeah. And Joakim?
Yes, I think it would have to stay in one way or the other because it's resilient, it's working, it's not so, I'm not, maybe, you know, it's been working for so long, and for, you know, national emergencies where, you know, maybe the internet is congestion because of something, you need to have alternate ways, maybe more analog ways of distributing very important information to the public. So I think in one way or the other, it will stay.
I'm not sure about analog, but yes, I think satellite's here for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
As an illustration of that, watch Greenland on Amazon. It's an asteroid disaster movie, and Gerard Butler gets a message through his television screen telling him to you know, go and decamp to one of the sort of refuges, the arcs. Yeah,
it would be too intrusive doing that over, you know, traditional normal internet.
His neighbors are all there, and they're annoyed as hell that they're not getting messages.
You'd have to dig up an old baseband engineer to get it working now, I should imagine.
I did have one last question, but I fear it might be too long, for, well, not the question, but the answers, given how much time we've got, which is, I was going to ask you, what's on your own product development roadmaps over the next 5 years? You can see why I was hesitating. So maybe if you can name one thing that's on your product development roadmaps each, over the next 5 years. Nehal?
One thing, it's going to be hard to pick. I think it's, for us, you know, it's all about helping service providers to do more and more with less. And that continues, right? It's never ending. It's all about helping them to reduce their cost, increase their throughput. And, you know, one of the big shifts we are seeing is the transition to connectivity. Finally, the switches are transitioning to 400 gig interface. And we see the industry jumping from 100 gig to 400 gig in the next 2 to 3 years. And with that, you know, software is going to become extremely critical, like optimizing the software to what your hardware has to provide. And that's one of the big things on our radar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Joakim?
Yeah, so what Nehal said, we're going to keep making the software being able to saturate the hardware. So yes, that is one of the core things. But I just wanted to mention one more thing, that I'm looking into open caching initiative right now. And that is in an early stage as it is right now. But I think it's going to be important to have a sort of unified architecture for how we can connect content providers with operators to make distribution much easier. So open caching is sort of a work in progress to open up APIs and create a reference architecture for how you build CDNs and to make it easier for content providers. So following that.
Great, thanks, Joakim. And Matt?
We'll listen to both of those. You know, it's intimidating to listen to exactly how fast and dramatic the changes in technology would be from a content creative perspective. And my part in supporting that from technology and operations is to be as ready as we can for whatever it's going to be. So that is to be able to have a supply chain that is, you know, that has its content and processes and data in the most agile position it can possibly be to be ready for any of those things. But I think, you know, talking about the aggregators and the businesses that will evolve around this, I suspect there's a business out there that doesn't yet exist that in 5 years' time we'll be talking about. Maybe, you know, its brand name will also be used as a verb. It'll be that sort of important to us, but we don't know what it is yet.
Chaps, thank you very much for this. I mean, it's fascinating, and honestly, there's so much more that we could have talked about. Matt, just even on that last point, about what's going to happen if we do move from broadcast to IP and all TV channels are apps? Yeah, what happens up to the user interface? What about the EPG? Who's paying for what? Yeah, are you competing with international brands as well as national ones? We could have talked for at least another half hour, I suspect. Thank you to our panelists, to Matt Westrup from A+E Networks, to Joakim Berg from Varnish Software, and to Nehal Mehta from Intel. Thank you to the audience as well. The on-demand version of this video will be available on the Varnish Software website in the near future. Yeah, you'll be getting communications about that. Thanks for joining us.